Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new edition of KerVAM. It's episode 24 today, where of course we're just 2 days away from Legend of the Sea Devils, the return of the Sea Devils for the first time since the story we're going to be talking about today, Warriors of the Deep. It's a story where I'm sure, it has a reputation, and I think we might be living up to that reputation possibly today. I don't know. Well, we'll see. But I'm joined by Charlie and Ryan today. Ryan, are you excited about talking about your least favourite Doctor Who episode of all time?
I don't know if I would use the word excited, but it's definitely good. It'll be a discussion, definitely. I don't know if it's like an excited discussion, but it's a discussion.
Yeah, it certainly is going to be that. And Charlie, do you feel there's going to be anything positive to say about this story?
I do have, I've got my notes here. I do have a couple of tiny positives.
That's good.
There's some tiny scenes that I find just okay.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, yeah, I do prefer talking more about, I find myself more excited to talk about the negative parts, like a season 17 discussion, this. It's just more interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I feel, we talked about the Sea Devils in our last episode, which was great fun. But I feel like after this, and well, we can hope Legends of the Sea Devils is also good. But I feel like after that, we need to all talk about a really good story, just to kind of get out of the negative zone of Warriors of the Deep and season 17 from a little while ago.
Yeah, I know we're jumping the gun a little bit. I know there was still a few discussions online of being like, Legend of the Sea Devils, it could be bad. I'm just like, it could be worse. I'm like, how can it be worse than this story? How can it be worse?
Yeah. Exactly. Yes, well, we might as well get tackling it. We're obviously going to talk about the story. We're going to talk about the special features as well, because we are loosely a Doctor Who DVD and Blu-ray discussion podcast. Obviously, there isn't as many of those to discuss at the moment. As I mentioned in the last edition, the season 22 box set has been significantly delayed due to packaging issues. It'll probably be out late June is the hope there. But yes, Warriors of the Deep, we wind our way back 38 years to 1984, albeit they shot it in 1983. The opening story of season 21 of Doctor Who, where JNT was like, let's have a season with lots of returning monsters. I mean, to be fair, that's more season 20, wasn't it? But he thought, let's tack on in season 21 and have the return of the Sea Devils and the Silurians. I feel like the Silurians are kind of the more main characters in this story, the villains, or at least earlier on. They're obviously the ones that are trying to, get the Sea Devils out of their hibernation, and it's set, amidst, for us, for the audience at the time, the Cold War, and it's very much playing into that idea, isn't it? Set. I feel like this Doctor Who Classic Who does this a lot, where they set a story like 100 or 200 or 300 or years in the future or the past. It's always like the same year, like it's 2084. This story's set. It always seems to be the same year, just 100 years plus or minus when they do past or future stories, which is always quite fun. But it's a story, it's fair to say, has a reputation for not being very good, for having pretty poor production values, being a disaster to make, being a pretty poor story, just all round pretty bad. So Charlie, I'm going to come to you first, and I'm wondering if you can give me one positive thing about this story.
Right.
I know that's tricky. I know it's tricky.
Yeah. I do have a couple here. So I quite like the element of continuity this story has, in the sense that we have obviously that Silurian Iktar, I'm pretty sure it's called, from Doctor Who and the Silurians. It's quite nice to have this sort of link, so it links it to a much better story from the past.
Yes.
And I do quite like how the Silurians and the Sea Devils remain in their sort of purposes. Like the Silurians are more tactical, they're generally more intelligent, whereas the Sea Devils basically just serve as their lackeys to do their dirty work, which is kind of what they were, just sort of mindless action plot elements in the Sea Devil. So I quite like how they sort of remained those roles there. That's about it for the positives.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's notable that the Sea Devils they are kind of similar to the Sea Devils, but also I feel like they kind of have a different style and role in each story. Obviously, we had the original Sea Devils in the original one, then we've got the sort of warrior version in this, and then we've got the pirate version we're going to see in Legend of the Sea Devils. I think it's quite nice to kind of be recreating the Sea Devils in a sense each time, obviously keeping the same idea but doing it a little bit differently, whereas with the Silurians I feel like they're generally kind of the same in every story that they are, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's just kind of a fact. And also, I know you mentioned about having a Silurian from Doctor and Silurians in it. I mean, I think that was a bit of retroactive continuity there, given he wasn't named as Iktar in the original story, he was just, I think, young Silurian or something. And then, oh, wait, actually, no, he was the same one. Well, we've said something positive about it. I mean, having watched it back, I feel like the first few minutes aren't that bad. Like, it's a reasonably interesting piece of setup. I know the set itself is, questionable and ridiculously highly lit and doesn't look that great, but there's some interesting stuff in there. We suddenly see these good model shots of the Silurian ship under the water. I think it's the Silurian ship, isn't it? Under the water, and all those sort of moody green lit shots of Silurians and stuff, just to ram home reptiles and stuff, I guess. But also aliens. I guess that's the lighting idea. But yeah, Ryan, I know you have a lot to say about this story. I don't know. Do you have anything that isn't negative about this story? Is there any aspect, even if it's like one tiny thing, that you do enjoy about this story? Would you say it's all round terrible?
I'm really struggling to think of any positive. Having rewatched it, I'm really struggling to try and find any positives. Maybe there is one slight one. I like that the Sea Devil voices are still the same ones from the original Sea Devils.
Yeah,
I thought that was good. Yep, that's about it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's all good. Okay, well, let's try and break it up into elements a little bit, this story, and really dig into the detail of why the story doesn't work, rather than just going, that's terrible, this is terrible. Let's try and do it, systematically destroy it. So let's start with the plot, the actual story, ignoring what it looks like or whatever, but the fundamental story of Warriors of the Deep. Why does it not work, Ryan?
Well, in terms of the story, well, firstly, do you want me to sort of try and break it all down in in chronological order of events, or does it even really matter at this point?
Does it even really matter? Just hit us with anything.
Well, I think the reason why it doesn't work was because, first off, I think I can see what Johnny Byrne was trying to perhaps go for, make a sort of an allegory to the Cold War about two opposing sides, and having in a way, having the Sea Devils and Silurians factor into that. It's a nice idea, but the problem is, while also trying to make it also a classical base under siege story, but the problem is, it's because it's not really properly done, it just feels like it's just vaguely sounding political speak. It doesn't really feel genuine, you know what I mean? It just feels, oh, this is just exposition. It doesn't really feel natural. It's just endless exposition with some vaguely political sounding stuff thrown in there. And it isn't helped by the fact that it's just mostly consisting of them being chased around by men in rigid rubber suits with a pantomime horse lizard. I mean, that's basically it. And
yeah, true.
That's really all it sort of boils down to. Although, and it's a real shame, Johnny Byrne, who started off great with Keeper of Traken, but just has been going downhill with Ark of Infinity and then this.
Not a good record.
It's two really awful stories.
And season openers as well for both of them.
I know, and it isn't helped by the fact that this opening story is one of the worst, in my opinion, the worst one, and it's bookended by my second or third least favorite one ever, with the Twin Dilemma. This season has started and ended roughly, hasn't it?
Yeah, there's some good stuff in there. Obviously, Kate Randazani, but outside of that, it's beginning and end is a bit of a struggle.
Yeah, and probably enough, I'm going to bring up Twin Dilemma a little bit later on, but yeah, it's just looking at it here. Another reason why the story doesn't really work. I made a note here. Every character, because a lot of this feels very padded. It feels like it's loaded to the gills with padding, with a lot of the actors saying their dialogue really, really slowly. I've noticed that also they're just saying it slowly just to fill out the runtime, because I feel like this could have, if it was done normally, I think it would have been done in 2 parts. I feel like, but it feels like it's just with it, the actors were just because they want to fill it out to 4 parts. They had all the actors just say their lines in a very slow manner, making it as slow as possible. And part 1 especially is very, very slow. I was struggling to keep awake during part 1 because nothing really much happens in it.
Thinking about it, you're right. It really is just, we introduce all the main characters and then have a fake missile launch, and the Doctor ends up there and then ends up in seemingly water, but it's kind of made to look toxic waste, even though it's actually just water that he then swims out of. There's really nothing, is there? You're right.
It's just an absolute nothing story. It's like the classic Doctor Who equivalent of Battle of Ranskorav Kolos, where it's just nothing's really happening and it's just exposition, and it's not really engaging at all. And and it is a help by the fact that because of how slow the story is, it's just the direction is flat. The direction doesn't really help because the direction is just a lot of just point and shoot. That's all it is. It's just there's no fancy camera work, no clever techniques. It's just a lot of point and shoot. That's basically it. Which is the direction Doctor Who directing. I'm just not a fan of because it's not engaging. And if your story's not engaging and your direction's not engaging, then what's really the point? And that's not even getting into the other stuff that I have with the story in terms of the monsters, the battle scenes. I mean,
and it's a shame, isn't it? Because I don't think, Pennant Roberts was the director on this story, and I don't think he's a bad director by any means. He's done stories like Sharda, The Pirate Planet, Sunmakers, Face of Evil. I mean, he did Warriors of the Deep and Time Lash, but, he's done some solid stories from a directorial point of view. It's not like he's known for being a terrible director. And yet I do just feel like so much of it was down to, like, obviously restrictions on studio time. So the way they could put everything together was, quite heavily restricted. And just the way that, as I said, it was so brightly lit through the whole thing that you could see all the, cracks and everything, basically. And I think that's really helped it, kind of knocked it down a bit, didn't it?
Yeah, I think the behind this, I mean, I know a little bit ahead in terms of behind the scenes stuff, but it can't be helped with the fact that all the behind the scenes drama has just bled out into the production because by then Maggie Thatcher called a general election, a snap general election. As a result, they lost a lot of the BBC lost a lot of studio space, and so they lost 2 weeks of production, and they were given the option of either scrapping it completely or go ahead, and even though it was going to be a very rushed production, and so J&T chose the latter. And I think he made the wrong call there, considering just what we did to classic Doctor Who. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself on that one. So it's just, and you can clearly, and because of this whole rushed production schedule, the actors had little to no rehearsal time whatsoever, which is why a lot of the lines just kind of feel very slow. And it also explains why all the performances seem really flat. I just feel like no one's really at the top of the game. They're just delivering sort of generic, flat performances. Peter Davison doesn't really seem engaged. Even Janet Fielding, who's usually at a high spot in the Peter Davison era, but I do think she's a great actress. I don't think even she stood out well in this time. I feel like even she wasn't that completely engaged with it, and I think it just shows the fact that how much this sort of rushed, hectic production schedule impacted this story in particular. And also, it's funny enough, it was this story where Peter Davison and Janet Fielding decided they were going to leave Doctor Who. It was during production of this story. So again, one of many reasons why this caused more harm to Doctor Who than it did.
Exactly. It's certainly a very significant story, if not necessarily for all the right reasons in that sense. But, well, Charlie, so what, obviously, we've established that the story itself doesn't really work. I mean, what do you think that the actual kind of visual look of the story plays into that? Obviously, this with the sets and the costumes and the acting performances, and how do you think that all plays into kind of just not helping a poor script anyway?
So yeah, the Silurians look awful, obviously. Like there's we've had some all right costume work in the Davison era. Like the next story, The Awakening, we've got Malice, and I think he looks all right. and even the Sea Devils look okay. Like, with like the samurai look, it's all right. It's not well put together, but I see what they were going for. But the Silurians, they're just rubber costumes that have no emotion at all. It's just, even if the actors are moving their faces, you just can't see anything. It's really bad. And the Merca, I think that kind of speaks for itself. It's
well,
just
here you go. You can enjoy it in all its glory behind me. It's
it's just terrible. In terms of the base, it's very overlit, which probably doesn't help things like the costumes. And I believe the Silurians, like the paint on them, was still drying when they filmed lots of the scenes in episode 4. So that explains a lot as well. It just looks like a generic Troughton era base. Like, I feel this is kind of best seen as just like a really bad parody of a base under siege Troughton story.
True, yeah.
And it probably has worse production values than if it was made like 15 years before. It's awful. I think the only good things, like I said, is the continuity, the visual look, the direction. It just, in terms of the acting and performances, nothing stands out. Like, I don't think the acting is like overtly terrible in any places, but it just, you can tell that they just had little to no rehearsal time. It's not great.
Exactly. It's like sorry, go for it, Ryan.
So I forgot to mention the rubber costumes. And first off, it's shocking the fact that the Silurian Sea Devil costumes from the 70s were more agile and more flexible and more emotive than the ones we got here. And there's a line in it, I made a note here, where Peter Davison says, "You fire and every Sea Devil in the area will come running." And I'm just like, really? The fact that they moved so slowly, they just waddle about like as if they're aging geriatric penguins. I mean, how are they supposed to be a threat? How are they supposed to come running? I mean, the 70s versions and presumably the ones in this upcoming story, I can believe that, but these ones, no chance.
Yeah, they're not the most mobile of creatures, are they, really, in this story? It rather shows up there. Exactly. It's a bit concerning. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, and think about the performances, as you say, Charlie, like there's nothing noticeably terrible, but it just feels like none of them are particularly inspired by the script is probably the way to describe it. Like we see the sort of, scheming machinations of some of the characters between each other, and they just look a bit bored with what they're doing. They're like, we're going to, we found the weak link. We're going to take advantage of the secret thing. But it's just in such an uninspiring way that all these performances come across that it just doesn't really make you want to get excited or engaged in it when it feels like the people who you're meant to be paying attention to aren't bothered by it either. So I think that's a rather, it's not, there's not anything like, I think they're a terrible actor for that reason or whatever. It's just that they don't really seem that bothered by it, which I think is really disappointing in that story and just, plays into it not really working. I mean, I think that the interior of the Silurian ship doesn't look that bad compared to like the sea base. I feel like it at least they lit it nice and dark, so you can't see half of it. And it feels a bit more moody and, dangerous and evil. Like, I feel like that helps that sort of setting a little bit. And, when the Sea Devils are being revived and stuff, that it looks okay. I'm not saying it's great. It's not, high budget stuff. But it does its job, I guess. And I like your comment about it being like a Troughton story. I feel like, do we think black and white would have saved this story? If it been a black and white one, would it have been, maybe it would have been more well liked?
It would have saved the costumes, but not the story.
I don't think black and white would have helped. I think it would have gone down badly like the Space Pirates.
True.
I think it would have been all the Dominators.
Yeah, well, maybe if they lost all 4 episodes, then we might think of it as a lost classic. That could be what it is.
Who knows?
Well, the
parallel world, maybe, but I don't know, man. I don't know.
It'll be a struggle, yeah. Right. Well, Ryan, tell us a bit more of your thoughts about this little creature behind me, because, as we've said before, this is the creature that killed Doctor Who in some ways. That was pretty significant, and Michael Grade used it as his example of what everything that was wrong with Doctor Who. Clearly, it's a terrible costume. Clearly, it was terribly realised on screen. Probably one of the worst, special effect costume things in Doctor Who history. Do we know why it ended up being so bad?
Yep. Well, again, due to the rush production, they had to rush out this costume, which was basically, they said, admittedly, had to be modelled on the style of the pantomime horse. And even so much so that they drafted in, I've written down the notes here, William Perry and John Asquith, who are both known for playing Dobbin the Panther horse from that children's show Rent-A-Car, so which kind of speaks to itself. So they had to basically rush this out, and JNT even went as far as to describe it as wonderful, as they say in the documentary. And I'm just like, boy, howdy, JNT, did you back the wrong horse there? It's just
indeed.
It's not very good, and good. They even said that they didn't have any time to rehearse in it because by the time they finished it, it had to be rushed down to the set. So which meant it arrived just slightly less than an hour after it had just finished. So it's like no rehearsals, no getting used to it. You just have to get into it, do the stuff, and then that's done. So so they couldn't, and you can tell it doesn't. Their movements don't look as rehearsed because it, as I said, they've only just got into that damn outfit and they're just barely moving about. And they even said like they had trouble turning around or getting through. So in order to do the scene again, they had to kind of shuffle backwards. And getting into it was a massive issue because it was like putting on a tight Wellington, which is really bad enough. And of course, the worst thing about it was the fact that because it had only just finished, the paint and glue and everything hadn't really dried yet. So the actors inside said that it smelt of adhesives. They said it was like the equivalent of sniffing glue. And I'm just like, this production kind of, sort of in a weird way, kind of caused drug abuse. And I'm just like, how? At what point did they think, you know what, we're running a really well-constructed production here. We've got this. At what point did they think that after doing this? And oh my God, this monster. And I just don't understand it. And I don't know if it's the worst one. I think the infamous Creature from the Pit might have all that title. But this comes very close second. This is follows very closely behind it. It was a bad idea from the get-go, and it was you can clearly see on screen it's a bad idea in realization. And when it's introduced, it's trying to get behind an obviously fake polystyrene door that's flopping about. You see Peter Davison's sort of dulled expression. He's like, oh no. It's the Merker. Even though he's probably no secret, it's obviously the Merker. He just knows that. And I'm just like, okay, we just got to roll with it, I guess. And
of course. Well, he knows all things. It's fine. We just roll with it. It's got to be done. It's plot convenient and all that, isn't it? It's what it's necessary.
Yeah. And do you think it will be a good time to also speaking of the Merc, I think we should also talk about the action scenes and that infamous
karate kick
scene in particular. The action scenes. Okay, I'm going to try and see if I can do it with a straight face. The first off, a little prelude to that, the bit where the Sea Devils sort of first enter the base and they're firing at them now obviously think this is going to be a big battle, but they're just waddling very slowly, and then you have the crewmen who are just only a few feet apart, and yet they're not firing correctly, and somehow the Sea Devil gets only one of them, and they're missing everywhere else, while the crewmen are obviously missing, even though they're that close to each other, and you have that commander just flatly going back. In the whole way. It reminded me of that bit in that film, Naked Gun 2, where they're having that fight on the road and a gunfight, and they're obviously so close to each other, and that's the gag. And I'm just like, that was meant to be a comedy.
Yeah.
This is meant to be taken seriously.
Exactly.
And it doesn't work. And speaking of which, my dad watched it with me. He insisted that we rewind, go back and watch that scene again 5 times.
Nice.
we were laughing.
You know it with a lot of detail now then.
Yeah, we were just laughing out loud. And of course, the ultimate low point has got to be that bit with Ingrid Pitt trying to do karate moves on a pantomime horse.
Indeed.
Just getting electrocuted. And it's, again, what else is there to be said of that scene that hasn't already been said by everyone?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the equivalent of talking about Jar Jar Binks in the Star Wars prequels. What else can there be said about
Well, indeed.
it?
Exactly.
It's the ultimate low point, and it's no coincidence that Michael Grade used that to describe why he hated Doctor Who so much, which, again, I'll get to that later.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like things like this show us just how, a story like this can actually be immensely enjoyable. Maybe not for the right reasons, but we can have immense fun watching this story and just laughing at how terrible it is. I feel like Doctor Who's at its worst when it's just boring, but this is laughably bad that we can actually get some enjoyment out of it. Just,
There were a few laughable moments, but it's just a shame that the rest of it was just so boring. If it was just consistently laughably bad, I would have probably excused it. But the fact that it's just mostly boring with only just like a couple, 2, maybe 3 moments of laughable is just a little bit like, and the fact that it comes a bit later on, it's just like, it's a bit too little too late. So, I mean, it's laughable, definitely, but I don't know if that completely saves it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Charlie, are there any other sort of, I guess, highlights but low light moments of this story for you where you're just like despairing at scenes in this? There's all the obvious Merca scene, but outside of that, what other parts would you say are particularly just terrible?
For me, it's besides the Merca, which is obviously the main one in the battle sequences, probably the scene, I believe it's episode 3, episode 4, where Turlo and Tegan are in this prison cell.
Oh yeah.
Well, they're being imprisoned by the traitor guard person. I don't even know what these characters are called. They're that bland.
Who knows? They all look the same, don't they?
Yeah, it's so dull, and the actors are just so bored. It's almost like loops back around to being enjoyable. Like there's an entire scene where Turlo literally just says, "What's that there?" And then the guard just replies, "It's a ventilation shaft." That's all it is. And the scene lasts like 30 seconds. And like it takes up nearly 2% of the entire episode. And I just...
That is some extreme padding, isn't it?
Yeah. That bit is so boring. I almost fell asleep during that scene. It's terrible. I feel the entire story is just... like, I love classic Doctor Who, probably more than the new series.
Yeah.
But I have some small issues with it generally, and all of these small issues are just merged together and amplified in this story to create like it's my second least favorite story. I watched the recon of the Space Pirates the other day.
Nice.
Good luck. That's my favorite Doctor Who story ever now, because I'd say if there's one thing worse than a bad story, it's a boring one.
Yeah,
that one has no laughably bad scenes. It's just boring. But it has a few bits, but it's still like, it's down there. It's a pretty awful story. I'd say the Merca is probably my second least favorite monster after Erato, but it's definitely down there with the Zarbi, the Chumblies, the Absorbaloff. It's Tim Shaw.
All those kind of things, exactly. And I feel like the Merca is, padding is a thing that is very prevalent in classic Doctor Who, particularly in longer stories, but also in 4-parters when they're not written very well. And you look back at the 7-part Doctor and the Silurians, and there is some serious padding in there. There is 2 episodes of that virus, which is literally just, we need to pad it out to 7 episodes. Let's introduce a virus that's going to kill a few people and stretch it over 2 more episodes. But it kind of, it's okay. It works. It fits into the plot reasonably well. Whereas it feels like the Merca is just a delaying plot padding tactic that just looks awful, serves no function, and makes the story even more laughable and ridiculous than it already was, which I think is a real struggle there. And as you say, Charlie, there's just, those really long, boring moments like that. I mean, even in episode 1, the amount of time the Doctor and Turlo and Tegan spend either in the TARDIS just chatting, and then about 1.5 minutes of the Doctor debating with that guy from Sentinel-6, and he, then there's like, and like he says, we just want to leave quite quickly, and then they hear nothing from Sentinel-6 for about 1 minute, and he's like, they're considering their options, and I'm like, no, they're padding time in this story, and then they end up just wandering around the sea base for ages before anything actually happens, and we're cutting to like the fake missile launch, and it's just a long slog, really, isn't it?
I thought I'd mention as well the possibly one of the worst Doctor Who cliffhangers ever, the end of episode 1.
Yes. Just face it, Tegan, he's drowned.
Even though he's in there for like 3 seconds. And
I know, and he looks like he's looking there all limp and flopping, and like he's just sinking into the water after 3 seconds. And then we cut to the next episode, and suddenly, he's just swum out and fine. He just decided to pretend to play dead for 5 seconds there for some reason. Like the shock he wouldn't have been knocked out because of the shock when he fell in the water. And I was so confused because it was meant to be an unauthorized area. There were like toxic hazard sort of signs on there, but apparently this was just water. Was it just water? Yeah. Was there any explanation for that? Because I thought it would be like acid or something. That actually makes sense.
Yeah, and speaking of which, a little bit behind the scenes stuff, Peter Davison himself stated that getting into that tank was so cold that he almost contracted hypothermia, where he spoke this bit of a squeaky voice afterwards, and I think it ruined his outfit, so that's why he had a different jumper and different trousers in the next stories afterwards, because it ruined getting into that water. It ruined them. So again, another of many reasons why this story doesn't really work. It ruins clothes, and speaking of clothes, if you notice, at the end of part 3 or beginning of part 4, whenever they interact with the Merc or get near it, you can clearly see the green paint on their outfits. You can clearly tell it's smudged. So, again, just goes to show the wisdom that went behind this production.
Well, exactly. Yeah, indeed. I do remember feeling like there was one moment where Peter Davison's acting came through. He had a really moody shot after he just got out and see the water, and he shuts the door and just sits there for a minute. And he does actually look very like this was a scary moment for me. This is a serious situation. Just one that was the only moment where I felt there was some good acting there. His eyes, he just looked genuinely like he'd been through a traumatic experience.
I feel at the end as well.
True.
I'm pretty sure it's the last line. Like there should have been another way. Yeah, that's actually very well acted. I think it was.
Yeah, that bit is really good, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, I've written down in my notes here after I've finished ended watching it. And he goes, "There should have been another way." I just sighed and went, I am right there with you, dude. Considering everything that happened, I am completely there with you.
Yeah, exactly. And well, this story obviously also starts a season full of death, frankly. Like, so many people die. Obviously, it peaks with Resurrection of the Daleks, where there must be like 100 people who die in that story or something. But even here, like, basically all of the main cast that are added into this story die. Like, virtually nobody survives. It's pretty grim stuff. Like, it's obviously laughably bad in places, but it's also pretty just dark and miserable and depressing. I mean, Charlie, do you think that it kind of is any positive or negative to the story that there's so much death in it?
I mean, I don't mind Doctor Who stories having a bit more of a grim tone and high body counts. Like, I really like Resurrection of the Daleks and Caves of Androzani, and lots of the Colin Baker stories I feel are saved by the somewhat darker tone, but here, when people are being killed by the Merca and the Silurians, it doesn't really have the same effect because it just makes it look like a bit of a parody. I don't think it, more deaths actively make it more good or bad in this story. They're just sort of there. But none of the characters I really care about, like your side characters, I can't even remember any of their names enough to care when people are killed. So, I'm just kind of in the middle.
sorry. Forgot to mention when there were 3 characters in this that apparently Johnny Bird said they were going to survive the story.
Okay.
There were 3 characters. 2, I think that commander. I think that one of that blonde female.
Oh yeah.
I think she was meant to survive as well, and the Silurian leader. I think Johnny Bird said that they were supposed to survive the story, but Eric Saywood rewrote it so that they all died, which I think could explain some things there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've obviously talked quite a lot about the actual story of Warriors of the Deep, but we also want to tackle the documentaries, the bonus features. There's obviously a main making of documentary on this on the DVD that was released with the Beneath the Surface box set back in 2007, 8, somewhere around then. Which is really good, really interesting, and obviously clarifies a lot of the production issues of the time. Alongside that, there's a shorter documentary chatting to the guys who played the Merca, which is also very interesting in terms of learning about just what a disaster the Merca was in creation. So, Charlie, what was some of the interesting takes from the making of documentary about this story?
Definitely the reasons behind this story was so bad. Like, I always find making ofs for stories that are like pretty awful a lot more interesting than those which have a very smooth production. Like, if you watch a making of about I don't know, like this Time in the Rani, Time Lash, that they'll be more interesting and insightful, just showing like them admitting it's bad and explaining why. I feel it's just interesting the reasons behind why it was so bad. And obviously the interview with the Merca guys was very interesting, seeing, the people behind the worst costume in Doctor Who history, probably. It was very interesting. I feel if there's one thing I want from the season 21 collection box set, when we do eventually get it, it's definitely a behind the sofa or Michael Grade reaction to this story. Like, I don't care about any other behind the sofa, just Michael Grade with this story. Now he's doing special features. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. That's going to be a big ask. It'll be interesting, considering Michael Grade himself used this story. I think it'll be definitely interesting. I mean, and despite my issues with Grade, I wouldn't mind be up for that. I think that actually sounds pretty interesting.
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what else did you take from this documentary, Ryan? Obviously, we know that there was an election, as you mentioned earlier, there was an election called 2 weeks before the story was going to go into production. So studio space was screwed. So that caused a lot of the issues there and meant lack of rehearsal time and all of that. But how much of an impact did that have, and what other sort of issues were there?
Well, I mean, I obviously didn't like the story when I first watched it, but watching the behind the scenes documentaries further showed why it didn't work so well. I mean, and it doesn't really help that as I mentioned before, the behind the scenes stuff just really bleeds out into the production and the final results. And obviously, I had a feeling that something didn't seem right when I first watched it, and the behind the scenes documentaries perfectly clear show why. The fact that they lost 2 weeks of production, the fact that Johnny Bird's original script had to be rewritten many times because of Ian Levine butting in and saying there's a lot of continuity mistakes, and Eric Saywood, you need to do this, and John Nathan Turner's like, I do not want to deal with any of this, Eric needs to do this, and Eric gets so frustrated as he's busy sorting things out with the Awakening, and it was bad from the get-go. It still continued further on, showing more behind-the-scenes stuff that just didn't really work. Overall, explain that the overlit sets, for example, they said that because of the rushed production, they didn't have time to kind of set everything up where there will be strategically placed lamps around with dark, moody lighting and floor lamps, because that would eat a lot into the production time which they didn't have anymore. So they had to rely on the studio lighting for it, even though it was something they didn't want. So that was why everything was so brightly lit. And also them saying that they were a bit afraid of the fact that by having dark locations, because they feel like if they had darkly lit sets, it would cause, as they quote, pensioners to writing saying something was wrong with their TV sets, which
That's the most ridiculous excuse ever, isn't it?
exactly it's just beggars belief. That's the thing. Every time I watch this and listen to their reasons behind it, I'm just like, what? I'm just like, what the bloody hell were you thinking of? It just doesn't really work. And them talking about Michael Grade and his reasoning behind it. Actually, do you want me to start delving into the Michael Grade?
Yeah, go for it.
Why it probably solidifies why this story is my least favorite story of all time. And also, I forgot, I just realized, there's also another little feature on here, because usually back when they had these DVDs, there would always be like a coming soon trailer for the next Doctor Who DVD release. The next one, the trailer they had for the next DVD release was for the William Hartnell story, The Time Meddler. And good Lord, I wish I was talking about that one right now. Somehow a story about a rogue Time Lord going back in time to mess up history is somehow more coherent and makes perfect sense than this story.
Yeah, it's true.
So yeah, with Michael Grade, by that point in time, he was made control of BBC One, and he was obviously, him and also Jonathan Powell as well, who was also became the head of the drama department, and they both shared a massive dislike for Doctor Who. And it can't be a coincidence by the fact that years later, when Grade appeared on Room 101 to talk about why he didn't like Doctor and why it was, in his own words, pathetic and rubbish, he showed a clip of the Merker and that Ingrid Pitt battles to show why he hates it so much. And it can't be a coincidence that this was made and released around the same time he was made controller of BBC One. So in a way, you could say this was the story that finished Doctor Who off. This pretty much signaled its end, and I think that's probably why it's my least favorite, because this was the story that killed off Doctor Who completely. I know people always point to the twin dilemma, but that was only merely the result of the viral disease-like infection that started with Warriors of the Tea.
It's true.
The twin dilemma was just merely the leftovers. That's basically the lifeless body, so to speak. And so I think that probably why Warriors of the Deep always rubs me the wrong way, was because that story signaled Doctor Who's demise in a really sad, tragic way. And maybe he should have if he scrapped the whole thing when he should have done, then maybe none of this would have ever happened.
True, very true. Yeah, we might have escaped all the poor productions from featuring so many issues and things. Yeah, we really could have hoped for more, maybe. But Charlie, was there anything else that stood out to you from watching this documentary about some of the issues? I mean, I think it's always good with documentaries like this to really understand why a production doesn't work. And I feel like there are stories that haven't had Blu-ray releases yet, to be fair, where there isn't really a proper documentary to kind of give you that understanding of why that story just didn't work. Whereas I think here, at least, we know what the problems were. I think that's really, really helpful, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I feel just a sort of documentation, it doesn't feel as much like an excuse, like, yes, it was bad, but look, this is why. It's not as much of an excuse. It's more just explaining, like almost like a confession, like, we're Doctor Who, this story was rubbish, here's why.
Exactly.
It's just sort of them admitting that it was terrible and just sort of owning up to it, which I quite like, really. It's just saying, you know, we're removed enough from 1984 to properly just talk, you know, say bad things about Doctor Who episodes that deserve it. Like in special features now, they can't really criticize the Chibnall era too much because we're in the Chibnall era. Whereas,
of course not, it's all marketing, it's all promotional material basically at the moment.
Yeah, but in 20, 30 years, they're probably not going to be afraid to do that because we'll be, you know, loads and loads of seasons on, we'll have surpassed RTD and a couple of other showrunners. So, I feel I like that we're far removed enough from that time to just talk honestly about Doctor Who stories rather than just say they're all good.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I sort of feel in many ways we don't want to rush to do new series sort of, Blu-ray box sets and like too soon before you actually are going to get the production crew willing to come and say the honest truth about an episode and about the situation. I mean, I feel like of all the people on the new show, Stephen Moffat's the one who's almost most inclined to say stuff that was bad and stuff he dislikes about himself and whatever. Like, RTD generally is just pretty positive about everything, and Chris just doesn't say anything. But I feel like Stephen is very willing to just slate his own stuff. Like, he thinks The Beast Below is the worst thing he's ever written and stuff like that. Like, even though he's not that far removed, he is willing to. So I feel like he'll be a fascinating contributor to documentaries in the future if we do ever get round to covering it off. But I feel like for RTD, we've got to wait a while, especially because we've got RTD2 now. And Chris, I just don't know with Chris. Like, I feel like he's going to he's never really talked that much about Doctor Who, even while he's been doing it. And I feel like once he's done, he's going to just move away for a while and not really have anything to do with Doctor Who. And then maybe in like 10, 20 years' time, maybe he'll start talking about it all again a bit more. But I feel like he's kind of done his bit, got a lot of hate during doing it, unfortunately, it's just such a shame. And I feel like, therefore, he'll just want to move himself away from it. But yeah, as you say, Charlie, I think that's what so helps so many of these classic documentaries, is that just everybody's there is willing to say, yeah, it was terrible and here's why. And I think that's what's so great about so much of the classic series Blu-ray and DVD range, that we get that now.
What you were I was just going to say, what you were saying about Chibnall. I was looking at that interview the other day that was going around, and Chibnall saying like he expects RTD to ignore his era. I feel that's kind of a shame, really. Like, I'm not going to delve too much into why I don't think all the criticism is fair, but I feel he's just going to step away from it for a while, maybe come back for some interviews and Blu-rays in the future. But generally I feel he's just going to sort of leave it to rest for a bit because of the negative criticism it's got. Exactly,
yeah. I think he's just not. It seems that Chris just isn't the sort of character of person to want to really have the limelight in any way. I'm not saying that Stephen and RTD really do, but they just seem more kind of naturally inclined to do interviews, to enjoy being interviewed on camera and want to chat about the show in public. Whereas Chris is very much just kind of a writer who gets on and does his job in the way he wants to. Like, he completely does what he wants to do with it, but also doesn't want to, get involved with all the fandom and doing interviews and all that in the same way, I think, which is quite interesting. And maybe it's to do with the response that he's had to his era, but I also feel like from the start, really, he's been quite, shielded like that in many ways.
Yeah, and he even mentioned that he was, with everything that was going on with in 2020 and all that, he actually considered, him and Jodie did consider leaving after Revolution of the Daleks. I think they would probably consider leaving, maybe just do one episode and that was it. It's all done. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, somehow they continued with Series 13 with Flux and these last Jodie special, which seems, I feel like there's more to it than that. I feel like there's a little bit more to it than that, but it's interesting that he said that about the fact that he and Jodie nearly left.
Yeah, exactly. It was really, that's one of the most interesting things I thought, because there's been lots of, we're kind of shifting on to Chibnall, Legend of the Sea Devil chat. We can kind of transition to it. It's fine. I feel like it's all relevant, isn't it? But yeah, it was interesting, lots of things that Chris has had to say this week. I think he did a big Radio Times interview and said a lot of interesting things that he hadn't really talked about before, essentially saying that he had always planned to only do 3 series with Jodie and then leave, and that from when he signed up in 2015 or something, that was his plan, and he was never going to do more than 3 series because he just didn't want to end up burnt out like Russell and Stephen did by the end of their eras, in terms of just almost not enjoying it because they'd been doing it for so long, particularly with obviously Stephen. And so I thought that was really, really interesting. And yeah, if sort of he couldn't see the end in sight in 2020, he would have just given up, because he couldn't, it was such a struggle to try and get Doctor Who together during a pandemic, that if it was like he'd have to be writing 3 more series from that point, he just wouldn't have done it. And I think, people were like, oh, well, I wish he'd left in 2020. And I'm like, but then we probably would be on like a 3 or 4 year hiatus from Doctor Who, because who's to say Russell would have wanted to jump in at that point? And I don't think they would have found anybody else during the middle of a pandemic to come and make Doctor Who. Like, that was never going to happen. So we probably would just be in limbo right now, potentially the end of New Who, if Chris had decided to just jump ship then and leave. And so I think we should all be very, as much as I know there's many different, feelings on Doctor Who Flux, the fact we got that series, the fact we've got 3 episodes this year, the fact we've got RTD coming back, I think that we should be so grateful for all of that. And I don't think any of that would have happened if Chris in, April 2020 just said, nah, I'm done with Doctor Who because I can't do this, which we would have been fully entitled to do, but he decided to stick with it. And I think that's such a great thing. And we should be so appreciative that he did, and that he's put together 9 episodes during a pandemic on the budget of 8, it seemed, as well, with, the reason why Eve of the Daleks is such a small episode. The fact that Legend is a bit shorter is because the BBC went, let's make a centenary special, but we're not going to give you any more money to do it. You've just got to make an extra episode of Doctor Who out of nothing, and it's just
Eve of the Daleks. Apparently, he did have a different New Year's Day special in mind, and that ended up getting scrapped, which caused him to write a new one, which was Eve of the Daleks at the last minute, and it took him a week to do it, which is
mad.
Considering everything, it's a miracle that Eve of the Daleks was.
It's a pretty good story.
So it's maddening that it only took a week to write that, and probably filmed it as quickly as it did, and with a small cast, a small location. So.
Exactly, and I've got the impression that Legend of the Sea Devils was also written relatively quickly, because I think Ella Road, who's the co-writer of this story, came on, did an interview saying that she was brought on, and in 3 days they wrote half the story or something, bouncing ideas between her and Chris, and just put the whole story together pretty quickly. So I think I imagine a lot of it is because all the focus has been put into Jodie's last episode, which was originally going to be probably an Easter special, was going to be her last one, but then obviously that's been become the centenary special because that's what the BBC wanted. But I feel like as good as Eve of the Daleks was, it was a solid small scale story, and as good as I think Legend of the Sea Devils is going to be, I feel like so much of the team's focus has been put into that last story that I think that's going to be a real big extravaganza of an episode, whatever it may entail, which I think is going to be really, really interesting. But yeah, I think it's been really fascinating to hear a bit more from Chris about his era and about his attitude to it all and everything like that, because I feel like we just hear so little from him most of the time about his era on the show, which is a real shame, and makes me hope that in 30 years time we'll be sitting there watching Doctor Who The Collection season 13, series 13 I guess, by that point, and Chris doing an In Conversation with Matthew Sweet or something, or whoever it is by that point if Matthew's no longer doing them, and just chatting honestly for an hour and a half about his era of Doctor Who, and finally telling us whether he actually did notice the fan backlash and was hurt by it or whatever with The Timeless Child and whatever, because I'm sure it must have impacted him, even if he says, I don't look on social media, I don't read reviews, whatever. I feel like it'd been hard to avoid some of the negative feeling around that at the time, but I guess maybe one day we will find out. But that kind of brings us meandering around to the end of our Warriors of the Deep discussion. A terrible story, guys, would you say?
Yeah, frankly, I know we might be jumping a bit ahead to the Warriors of the Deep discussion. Sorry, Legend of the Sea Devils discussion. I know, as I said at the beginning, a lot of people think it could be the new story could be worse. But after this, Warriors of the Deep, I'm just like, how can it be worse? I mean, the best we can say about Legend of the Sea Devils, the only way it can go from here is from Warriors of the Deep. It can only go up from here.
Yeah,
or sideways, but there's no way it can go down. The best we could say is it's still my least favorite story, and hopefully we can just pretend this never existed.
Well, exactly. Yes, yeah. And Charlie, any final words?
It's not the worst Doctor Who story ever. It's probably my second least favorite because there are some laughably bad elements. But yeah, I feel if this didn't exist, Doctor Who might not have just stopped production in 1989, 5 years later. That's sort of the reason for the hiatus and so many problems further down the line. So it's a shame, really. But yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like the final word on this could only go to the Fifth Doctor, where he says there should have been another way.
Yeah.
So all that can be said. All that can be said. Exactly. Well, let's bring ourselves on something hopefully more positive. Let's talk about Legend of the Sea Devils, of course. As we record it, it's airing in 2 days' time, so hopefully we're listening to this podcast before it airs, or if not, you'll just be listening to our probably terrible predictions about this story that turn out to be all wrong and whatever. But yeah, Doctor Who's Easter special, the unfortunately penultimate episode of Doctor Who in 2022, the penultimate episode of the Jodie Whittaker / Chris Chibnall era. Probably by Sunday night we'll have had a trailer and maybe know the title to the last episode of the era, which will be quite something. But let's focus on Legend of the Sea Devils for the time being. The return of the Sea Devils, as I said, for the first time since Warriors of the Deep 38 years ago. So it's a pretty big moment, I feel like, for Doctor Who fans. It's one of the most recognisable Doctor Who villains that hasn't returned up to this point. So Charlie, where would you say you're sitting in terms of excitement for this story at the moment?
I mean, I've never really been overly hyped for any point in the Whittaker era. It doesn't do that for me in the same way RTD and Moffat's eras really did. Like, I remember just being so excited after finishing Heaven Sent, World Enough and Time, those kind of stories. This era's never really done that for me. As far as Chibnall's era goes, though, I'm pretty looking forward to it. Like, I always look forward to Chibnall's episodes more like a few minutes before they release, just because I get some new Doctor Who. There's not really a hook there. Like, it's not like the Master's returning. It's not like there's a regeneration. There's nothing really new or exciting teased. But as far as the story goes, I am looking forward to seeing something like it's going to be pretty much the last somewhat normal Doctor Who episode. I mean, we haven't really got a normal, non-special, non-flux Doctor Who episode since like February 2020.
Yeah, Can You Hear Me was the last time, and probably the next time will be 2024.
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be nice to have something resembling a relatively normal episode. And as far as I've read all the Doctor Who magazine interviews, things like that. It's looking like quite a good episode. I feel Chibnall's episodes are better when he's got a co-writer. Like obviously it was Maxine Alderton for Village of the Angels, just to sort of keep it tethered somewhat. Because I don't think, just to sort of, I don't know, it's hard to explain. But basically, his co-written stories, I do feel, are a bit better. So, yeah, I'm generally looking pretty forward to it. I don't think it's going to be the best of the era. Like, I can see it being a solid, 8 out of 10, though. I think it'll be quite good.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I'm sitting at the moment. Is like, I'm trying to get myself excited. I'm not excited about it, but I don't feel like, oh my days, I can't wait till Sunday. It's the most exciting thing ever. I feel like I'll be more like that for the centenary just because it's such a big episode with the regeneration and everything. But I am fundamentally excited to see the return of the Sea Devils and what that's going to bring for Doctor Who. I mean, Ryan, you've obviously, not been the greatest fan of the Jodie Whittaker era, I think it's fair to say. Do you have more or less excitement for this than some of the more recent episodes?
Not as such, but I think this of these 3 specials, I have a feeling this could be my favorite of them. I don't know why. I'm just having the feeling that this could be my favorite of the 3 specials. I mean, I enjoyed Eve of the Daleks, and I have a feeling this is going to be a really entertaining pirate story with Sea Devils. I mean, I think that's a good combination. I know there have been some theories that the Merker, a redesigned Merker, could be in it.
Based on the trailer.
I'm kind of doubting. I have a feeling that's just going to be another sea monster that the Sea Devils have at their disposal. But if it is the Merker, I'm going to be very shocked indeed. I'm going to be one of the most shocked I've ever been about a Doctor Who story in my life, probably. But yeah, I have a feeling it's going to be probably my favourite of this trilogy. I don't know. I just feel like, even though more attention seems to be going into this final episode of Jodie's, I think at best I'm going to like it. I mean, I've said this a few times before, but I'm feeling at best I could end up liking it, but I probably won't end up loving it because it's meant to be the culmination of everything of the Chris Chibnall, Jodie Whittaker era. And it's an era that I haven't really found any that strong emotional attachment to. It's an era that I've felt has been like the Peter Davison era, all of 80s Who, really, very mixed, a very mixed bag overall. And so, and I feel like the relationships have been underdeveloped. And if this is meant to be, that's meant to be the culmination of everything and all the ideas that I have not been a huge fan of, example, Timeless Child, I feel like I'm not going to feel the impact that it wants me to have, which is why Legend of the Sea Devils could end up being my favorite of the 3 because it'll probably be the most standalone and the most enjoyable. I have a feeling it's going to be that. I mean, who knows what could happen, but one thing's for certain, it can't be any worse than Warriors of the Deep. Absolutely not.
Exactly. We can hope for a step up on that at the very, very least. Yeah, I mean, I know Chris, I think it was Chris, somebody said that there's going to be lots of continuity references in this story, so we might get a few references back to the Sea Devils and the likes, which is always a good bit of fun. I mean, I feel like Chris is just a big nerdy Doctor Who fan as well, so likes to throw in things like that. Obviously, I think there'll be lots more action scenes. I feel like it'll be bigger in scale than what we saw with Eve of the Daleks, certainly. Sea Devils fighting like Yaz on a pirate ship just sounds like quite a fun combination, I think. So it's going to be quite a sort of action-packed, exciting adventure. And I guess the other big thing is obviously the Doctor and Yaz's relationship that is going to be developed in some way in this story. I find it kind of hard to read into the various quotes that sort of I feel like Chris or Ella Road and people like that have said about it, where some of them seem to say it's a bigger part of the story, some of them seem to say it's a lesser part of the story. I'm really it's going to be addressed in some way, we know that, but I'm struggling to know exactly where it's going to take us. Like, are they both going to share their feelings for each other? Are we going to leave it until the last episode? I don't know, Charlie, what are you getting the sense that this is going to kind of play in this story? What's going to happen with it?
I mean, firstly, I'm not a huge fan of it to begin with. Like, I'm not a fan of Doctor-companion relationships, full stop.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's also just too little too late. Like, it's the penultimate episode. It was addressed in the third to last episode of the era. If they did it, it should have been in Revolution of the Daleks, I think, after 13th Doctor was obviously away for 10 months in the prison. Yeah. Well, more for her, but, So, yeah, it's a bit too little too late. Like, I don't know how they're going to really resolve this in a satisfying way. It's just a bit confusing why they're doing it now of all times. It's like Chris Chibnall thought, what's one thing we can do that some fans will enjoy? Let's just make Thasmin happen for a bit. It doesn't really feel like it's actually going to go anywhere. I feel there'll be a couple of references here and there, and then a proper scene or two at the end.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to be as cleverly woven into the main story. So yeah, I feel it'll be addressed and there'll be a scene or two at the end, but yeah, fundamentally I think it'll be resolved in a less than satisfying way in the centenary special.
Yeah, where have we heard that before? Resolved in the last episode in a less than satisfying way.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what you just said there, Charlie, this is probably another of many reasons why I'm not going to really love or get into her last story, is because if it's meant to be the culmination of everything and it's the culmination of these relationships, this Thasmin has been so underdeveloped and, as you said, too little too late. It's just, if it's meant to resolve everything, it just, as I said, just feels too little too late, and it's just not going to be as satisfying, which is why, if it, as you say, it should have been properly started and developed at least with Revolution of the Daleks, like you said, and then built more and more throughout Flux or Series 13. And if they had done that, maybe it would have been a bit satisfying. But the fact that it's just thrown in at the last minute, which it actually kind of was. I mean, I think Mandip Gill said at a convention that she didn't find out about it until she read the script for Eve of the Daleks, which kind of speaks volumes, really, about how so last minute it all feels. So, yeah, which is probably the reason why I think I'm going to enjoy Legend of the Sea Devils more than her last story. But again, we shall see.
Well, exactly. And I guess the last question to say would be, where do you think that this story is going to end? Where do you think we're going to be left at the end of this story? Do you think it's going to just be an end of an episode? Are we going to get a cliffhanger with a master turning up or something? Or I'm really unsure where this is going to end at the moment. What do you think, Charlie?
I feel, firstly, people are being perhaps a bit too optimistic with what we're going to see. Like, I don't think there's going to be a master cliffhanger. I think it's going to be they go back into the TARDIS, wrap things up a little, maybe a scene addressing Thasmin.
Yeah.
And then it'll just end.
Yeah.
We might get a title or something, but I think some people forget that the episode is 6 months away, and marketing in the past couple of years for Doctor Who hasn't been brilliant. I definitely can't see them doing a trailer at all until...
I mean, the only reason I say that is that Matt Strevens said at the convention back in February that there would be a teaser at the end of Legend of the Sea Devils for the Centenary Special. So even if it's like a 10-second, teaser, we might get that. But yeah, you're right, maybe not a full trailer.
I feel if it is anything, it will be just a little clip of the Master saying, Sacha Dhawan will return as the Master. That would be good, and I think he will definitely return.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I can't see it being a proper trailer, to be honest. I feel it's just a bit too early, to be honest.
Yeah, true. What about you, Ryan? What are you expecting the story to end on?
I have a feeling, like you guys said, just a very brief tease about the final episode with the Master, which isn't going to be very surprising because even though they said that he could return at the end of Flux, I mean, I knew he was going to be the final enemy ever since the end of Series 12. I had a feeling like, oh, he's going to be the last villain that Jodie will ever face. I just know it. I mean, they did that with Tom Baker, David Tennant, and to a certain extent Peter Capaldi as well. So they've done that in the past. Of course, they're going to do it here. So it would be nice, but it wouldn't be that surprising to me.
Yes, it's not the most original idea a writer's ever come up for Doctor Who, is it? To have the Doctor's last episode face off against the Master. Who's done that? No one's done that before. Obviously not. Never been done.
Yeah. Never happened.
Exactly. Well, I think we've all got mixed levels of excitement for Legends of the Sea Devils, but hopefully, next week we'll be chatting positively about this story and about how it, surpassed our expectations and was a great, fun episode of Doctor Who, which is what I'm really hoping it will be. And I also, just to note, as this is a DVD and Blu-ray podcast, that there is randomly a DVD release that's turned up on Amazon for Eve of the Daleks and Legends of the Sea Devils. Just those two, which have been put together for a DVD release. Coming in June, supposedly. There's no information about it yet, and Eve of the Daleks itself never got a DVD release, so I'm quite intrigued. I don't know. Any thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I think it's just a bit strange to do those two, and they'll do a separate one for the Centenary special. I honestly don't know why they don't just wait for the whole trilogy to be released and then do a DVD Blu-ray in like November or something. I feel for like the 60th, 59th anniversary, they could do that or something, but it's just a bit strange to do those two in one and then the Centenary is.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they're going to end up doing like just these two, and then they'll do an individual for the Centenary, then they'll do an all three specials as well. Maybe they're just trying to milk it. I don't know. It's very odd.
I mean, they did this a few times in the past when they did the last David Tennant specials. They had the next Doctor and the Planet of the Dead separately, and then they did a bit of a box set with Waters of Mars and End of Time before a few weeks later doing the complete specials. And then they did, I think they did the same with the Day of the Doctor and Time of the Doctor, where they had separate releases until they gave them a full box set. And for some reason, with Capaldi's last season, they didn't include Twice Upon a Time with Well Enough for Time of the Doctor Falls on that disc when it should have done, really, since that is part of it. Instead, it got its own separate release. And although, funny enough, Revolution of the Daleks, that only got a separate release, and it hasn't been included on the Series 13 set.
Yeah, it's bizarre why that didn't end up put with the Doctor Who Flux box set. That was very, very... I know it's not part of Doctor Who Flux, but it just seemed weird to just have that missing in the middle between the two series. But I feel like there's always been a messy consistency with including specials on New Who box sets. It always just seems to go a bit awry at points, doesn't it? So... maybe when they do the collection in the future, they'll sort it all out and it'll be all nice and neat and tidy. But for now, we have to just manage the slightly messy nature of it all. But that's about it for this edition of KerVAM. Of course, next week we will be back to review Legend of the Sea Devils, and it's also a very special edition of the podcast because it marks our 1 year anniversary. I couldn't believe it. You guys told me the other week that it's nearly a year since we did it, and I was like, that is mad. So yeah, join us next week for some sort of anniversary celebration. I don't know quite what that'll be yet, but we'll celebrate in some way. I don't know, maybe we'll just get poppers or something. I don't know. We'll work it out. But it'll be good fun, I'm sure. And obviously, we all hope to enjoy Legend of the Sea Devils this weekend. But yeah, that's about it for this edition of KerVAM. Remember to check us out on Twitter at KerVAMPod. And also, you can obviously enjoy the podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on my YouTube channel as well, EMS Productions. And thank you, Ryan and Charlie. Ryan, have you had a good time today chatting about the worst story ever?
Well, I mean, don't know about the quality of the story itself. I mean, still stands, but yeah, it has been fun. Definitely fun. Yeah. Wouldn't want to check it out again, though, but who knows, if they do the season 21 box set, that could end up being inevitable.
That'll be the one and only other time we have to talk about this story. That's the one and only time. We'll never talk about it again apart from that. That's the only time. And Charlie, and looking forward to Legends of the Sea Devils, let's hope for a good episode, shan't we?
Yeah, I am feeling a bit positive about it. I can definitely see it being the best of the 2022 specials. I don't think it's going to be the best episode ever, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Exactly. Well, thank you guys, and that's just about it from this edition of KerVAM. So join us next week for our anniversary special, but until then, it is goodbye.